Hello. Hello. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. Today is the first of our data deep dive sessions as part of the DFJ Trailblazers program. Today we're really fortunate to have John Foster from Data to Insight, who'll be leading through the session and the conversation that we have today. Thank you all for coming. I know lots of you have been involved with us as part of the DFJ Trailblazer program so far, but for a lot of you, I know this is probably your first engagement with the program and with us as Mutual Ventures. So we'll start very briefly with an outline of who Mutual Ventures are. John will share a bit about Data to Insight, and then we'll progress from there into the session and a little bit more around the context that we're talking about today. But I'm Luke Bevere. I'm a senior consultant at Mutual Ventures. I'm part of the team working on the DFJ Trailblazer program. And once again, it is great to have you all with us today. So Mutual Ventures, we are a specialist public sector management consultancy, and we work across public services, but we have a kind of a really strong emphasis on children's social care. So we've worked on several of the large DFE funded programs that are happening at the moment, including the Family First Pathfinder program, partnership program. We've worked on similar projects around fostering and regional care cooperatives. And at the moment, we're also working with the department on its kind of work in the family justice space. So that's working with, there were 5 Trailblazers, which we'll talk to you a little bit more about in a moment. And then the subsequent National Learning Support Programme that we've been running off the back of that. John, over to you to talk a little bit more about Data to Insight.
Thank you, Luke. Yeah, hi everyone. And like Luke says, it's great to see so many people here today. Really excited to share what we've been working on. So Data to Insight is a small organisation that is hosted by East Sussex County Council. And we work to improve data across the children's social care sector. So examples of work that we've done is we've built the chat tool that local authorities use to interface with their ILACS inspection, their Annex A lists. We also make benchmarking tools available. More and more, we're working on data projects where perhaps data isn't easily available through our normal routes to statutory returns, and advise on how we can work to better our understanding of these service areas through data.
Wonderful, thank you. So, John, again, if you want to talk through the aims of the session, and I'll pull these down so you can talk it through.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Luke. So for the aims of this session, what I wanted to do is obviously the people that we tend to work with, our main kind of community is local authority data analysts who are supporting children's social care. And they may well not be familiar with the DFJ Trailblazers project, and in fact may not be overly familiar with kind of pre-proceedings data or care proceedings data, and certainly may not be familiar with the wider system. So for this first session, what I wanted to do was kind of take it back to first principles really, and have a look at what we got up to in phase 1, but kind of prior to that, look a little bit at what the family justice system looks like, provide an understanding of why improvements are such a kind of big hot topic at the moment, and then talk a little bit about what we did in phase 1, and then a few key lessons that I think will be really helpful for local authority data people in particular. So that focus is really going to be on kind of local authority analysts, but I'm really happy to kind of take comments and questions on anything really as we go through. Excellent.
Thank you, John. So that's the aim. So then here I'll take a couple of minutes to talk about the DFJ Trailblazer program and how that fits in with the family justice system across the country, and then we'll kind of progress from there. So the DFJ Trailblazer program. So DFJ stands for Designated Family Judge, and so all local authorities will be part of a designated family judge area, and this is around the part of children's social care where social workers will will kind of progress through with the family to care proceedings, and a particular judge and a particular court area will have the responsibility for all the care proceedings that take place within that area. So you'll have several local authorities all feeding into one court with one designated family judge as their kind of head judge, so to speak, in that area. The pilot program was focused on tackling five key things. So the first was tackling the drivers of delay across the family justice system. So that's where over the last several years, the length of time it takes for a case to progress through care proceedings, that there is a kind of a statutory limit on that taking place across 26 weeks. And actually, the average of that over the last few years had gone up and up. Actually, the last couple of years, it's begun to come down again on average. But the programme was looking at in detail at what are the things that are causing that delay to happen and how can we go about addressing that. We were also looking at mitigating individual agencies working in silos, which was one of the key challenges that came up a lot, of how local authorities were and CAFCAS and the courts team and judges and judiciary service weren't collaborating in an effective way. We're also looking at it was connected into the pre-case management hearing pilot. It was looking at how to divert more cases from court, so actually about stopping the number of cases and getting to court if they don't need to be there, and also looking at reducing costs. So where we've got to so far is there was an initial pilot which worked with these 5 Trailblazer areas. We took them through, so Mutual Ventures, we were appointed by the Department for Education as their delivery partner. So we provided support to the 5 areas, and they were Guildford, Central London, Essex, Suffolk, and then Southend-on-Sea and Thurrock, and then Cheshire and Merseyside and Wolverhampton. So there are 5 areas there. We took them through a process where we worked with them to understand their current context in more detail, to prioritize and develop solutions to address their key drivers delay that were the most prevalent in their local area. We have subsequently then taken the learning from this process through phase 2, where we're rolling it out to the rest of the country and to other DFJ areas. And these 2 sessions that we're running here with Data to Insight form part of that wider learning program. And so that's what we're here today, to kind of share some of the learning from this program with you all today. So John, for the rest of the presentation, I will hand back to you. You might be on mute, John.
Do you know, it's always the thing that gets you, isn't it? At some point I was going to say I was going to just run through the data sets that we looked at, but I don't have sharing ability. Do you want me to like quickly email those over in the background, or?
Yeah, that'd be yeah. Just let me know. Send that over, and then I'll flash them up when you want me to.
Perfect. Let me just do that now. I will struggle to do 2 things at once, so I'll just do that first. I'll just do the one. Perfect. Okay, that's on its way over. So why is there a focus on delays? Well, as Luke said, the statutory timescale for public law cases is 26 weeks from care proceedings being initiated to disposal. And CAFCAS, so this is the independent body who works with children and families to advise the court on best interests of the children. They publish regular data on court timescales, and the average across the country, so this is the average for the whole country, was 37 weeks. And that varied by DFJ area. So the maximum was 53 weeks and the minimum was 24 weeks. One of the things that was highlighted that doesn't really stand out in the data, though, is that while the average is maybe over 26 weeks, there were small numbers of children who were waiting substantially longer than that. So we can see that timeliness of disposal is really a critical issue against the timescales that we've been set. Secondly, obviously this is an area that local authorities in particular get inspected on as part of Ofsted's ILACS framework. these middle two bullet points are taken from the Ofsted ILACS inspection framework, and they talk about care proceedings being something that they look at, though they understand that it is part of a wider system, and there are a lot of organisations who are involved in the kind of running of that process. And they do say that they won't make any judgments about partner organisations or the judiciary or anything like that, but they do report on system-wide strengths and weaknesses. So since the ILACS framework came into being, it's something that's come up more often within your Ofsted inspection as part of as part of a local authority. And then finally, I've just dropped in a quote from the National Audit Office report that came out in 2025. So that's last May that came out, and just focusing really on what delays can mean for children. Saying that children who are waiting for permanent care will be increased risk of harm, anxiety, instability, and disrupted friendships or education. So it's always useful and important to bring it back to the experience of the children and families who are going through that system. On to the next slide, please, Luke. And Luke showed a version of this which was kind of truncated, and you'll be able to see what the Trailblazers solutions were focused on. But for this workshop, it's really that second strand that I wanted to talk about. So building on the programme of current work to improve pre-proceedings data by extending the data collection to cover the whole child journey, including outcomes for children after proceedings. So that's that one. On to the next one, please. This is just, so when we send these slides out afterwards, I think it's just useful for people who aren't maybe as used to working within this system to realise just how complex it is and how many different organisations and bodies can be involved. So at the top, you've got the Department for Education. So when we're thinking about this from our local authority side, clearly we've got the Department of Education who act as our kind of key ministerial department. But then there's a whole other section where you've got the Ministry of Justice who are responsible for the other side. So once it starts going to court, you've got the MOJ who take ultimate responsibility for that. You've also got CAFCAS involved, who are not part of the MOJ, but I think they do kind of report into them, and the HMCTS, then the judiciary are a separate body. So when we think about the whole journey and the whole data journey, we have to understand that local authorities are really responsible, and local authority analysts in particular are really only keepers of the data for kind of one small section of that process. Although of course we do get data back once a child has been through the court process, we will get data back on their outcomes. But it's just really important to note that this is a complex system. There's lots of moving parts within this, and one of the things that the DFJ Trailblazers project did so successfully was getting those bodies together really through the DFJ, just to understand some of these issues. Next slide, please. So the data lessons learned, I think it was a really interesting project. So I particularly worked with two of the Trailblazers areas. And I think it's a fair reflection to say that one of the lessons learned that was mentioned earlier was good data supports clear oversight. But I think it's a fair reflection to say that local recording is variable. So not all LAs are recording the same thing. Not all LAs have the capacity within their case management systems to record the same thing. Benchmarking is not something that really exists for pre-proceedings data at this point. It doesn't exist for care proceedings data. And so if areas are looking to make improvements through their DFJ or with their DFJ partner authorities, I think it's fair to say that benchmarking is something that may take a little time to develop. The second point here, some key data may not currently exist and may need to be developed. So it kind of links to that first thing. A lot of the things that we wanted to look at, for example, assessments data and data on repeat assessments, which were often identified as a contributor to delays, they just really weren't. This was not something that was being recorded routinely. There was no routine kind of monitoring of this. So there was really a lot of work to kind of get that data it's not something that's forming part necessarily of the regular local authority performance dashboards. Maybe certain areas may be more advanced than others, but certainly it was something that was not really well developed. And onto that point, the flow of data was different than we might be used to. So in a local authority, normally your data flow on kind of statutory, so statutory in the term of it forming part of a statutory return, that statutory data will usually come from a central team. There'll be a performance or a data team who are coordinating data from a case management system, cleaning that data, making sure that it fits within the statutory requirements, uploading to the government, and then that gets published back out. So it's a rigorous process. Often the flow of data that we were working with here was quite different. So it wasn't necessarily the data teams who were involved. It was falling to the practice leads and the practice teams. So it may be coming off a kind of separate tracker, or it may be coming from a legal team. And obviously there are capacity issues around that. And also obviously any data that's being managed outside of a case management system is more vulnerable to data quality issues. It's just the nature of how we work. So I think as well as there being systemic complexity across the macro system, across the wider system, I think in micro, this data is more complex than local authorities are used to. And it requires more work and it requires capacity. And then LA's mentioning that data could be different across different organizations. So there was definitely feedback, particularly around timeliness, that sometimes the data that we were thinking of from CAFCAS in timeliness may not look the same as data that we were reporting with our own local authority. And I think that points to there being a lack of consistent definitions across organizations. So, local authorities currently are perhaps working to a different set of definitions than CAFCAS might be. So it just adds to that whole picture of complexity, really. However, what was really positive about the DFJ Trailblazers and the way it worked in the areas I worked with was that there was capacity given to managing data. So obviously I was acting on behalf of Mutual Ventures to support the DFJ areas, essentially acting as extra capacity to pull that data together, analyze it. And of course, there was a discovery phase. I think anytime you're working with a new set of data, you kind of have to accept that there's going to be a little while where that data is not perhaps you can't necessarily make informed analysis of it in the first instance, because some of it will come down to different definitions. So yeah, definitely a discovery phase. And then finally, the idea of linking data with practice, creating powerful understanding. So one of the things that worked really well in the DFJ areas was that we had a separate space for performance meetings. So we would get together, we would look at the data sets that we'd created, and try to understand the stories that were coming out of that. And I think there's a really important lesson there, that whenever we're thinking about data, we obviously can't just use it to make statements. We always have to use it to ask questions and to go back to the practice and to understand what is it that we're looking at. If there are delays, and if we're saying that we're getting a lot of requests for repeat assessments, what is it that's happening? Is there differences between local authorities? And really just using it as a starting point for a conversation. And I think where we're at now, we don't necessarily have that starting point, because we're kind of all looking at things differently and we're all looking at different measures. We don't necessarily have that starting point to even really start asking good questions. So this model, I really believe, is a good way to kind of get past some of that wonkiness. On to the next. I think the next one is, yeah. So what I'll do, Luke, if you're able to just pop up there.
I think I.
Oh, you've given me sharing thing. That's
I
even
should
better.
have given you permission. Yeah.
You did. Perfect. So what I will do is I'll run through the data set. So this was the, I won't run through both. This was the data set. You'll have to tell me. I have a, hopefully you'll be able to see that. Is that looking all right? You can legible?
Yeah, it's good for me.
Perfect.
2 thumbs up as well.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. So I was going to show both data sets, but really the only point I was going to make is that the data set that was used in the other region I was going to refer to was less detailed than this one. And I think that, given time, we could possibly have moved to this more complex data set. But in the kind of initial setup phase, the LAs involved worked really hard to get this level of consistency. So it's just a point to say that, it doesn't have to be this complex to start with. You can start with the basics kind of thing. So obviously you can see here what we'd be looking at is number of children at the end of each quarter, or within a quarter. So you'd be looking at kind of volumes of children coming in, how many children are in each local authority, how many are opening care proceedings. When we created the analysis for this, obviously we linked it back to our rates per 10K as well. We linked it back to our CLA population, all this kind of contextual information, so you can kind of see where, if you had really high numbers, was it just down to population? We were looking at our pre-proceedings durations, what the exit pathway was as well. So one of the things we were really interested in doing was trying to visualize a kind of flow through as well. Could you visualize this kind of flow through of children kind of coming into pre-proceedings? How many of those were then going on to care proceedings? How many were taken out? All this kind of thing. What the application pathway was. So whether it was going to pre-proceedings or whether it was going straight to court. And that was substantially different between LAs as well. There were differences there. And then we talked about assessments completed. So assessments came up as one of the areas that we mentioned good practice. So if you're putting work into making sure your pre-proceedings work is high quality, and that assessments are high quality, and that there's good learning, good capacity and ability, that is one area that may possibly look at reducing delays. Looked at historical data, average duration in weeks, average case durations. Was there a difference in the duration of proceedings where there had been pre-proceedings versus not? What was the shortest? What was the longest? So it's really just trying to give a visibility of what does it look like. And I think local authorities may not have had that ability to do that prior to this. And then we were looking at outcomes as well. So what were the outcomes for those children? Obviously, it was all aggregated data, so we weren't taking child level information. This was all aggregated. And I know there's been work in the past through Warrington to look at what child level work might look like. So, there is lots of similarities here to that, but this was just unaggregated. And then also, were outcomes different if you'd been through pre-proceedings versus just going straight to care proceedings as well? I think this was something I would have really wanted to focus on, whether obviously we took a year's worth of data, and it was really limited in the amount of LAs who were contributing, just because the DFJ areas aren't huge. But I think it's a really interesting line of understanding, if you're going through care proceedings, and particularly as we start to look more at family group decision making, is there kind of going to be more of a link to SGOs and things like that? And then here we were looking at what the primary causes and the secondary causes of delays were. So LAs were given the opportunity to say what they felt the primary causes of delay were in each case that went over 26 weeks. And they were also able to give further information during the other thing as well. The ones that seemed to come through most strongly through this were court availability. So that was the one that was given most often as the reason for delay. But then requests for repeat assessments as well. And obviously, again, given the time and the kind of limited data that we had, it wasn't, I'm not suggesting that court availability is the reason we have delays in care proceedings, but I think it's important that, again, this is used as a starting point. So where this was really effective is we'd look at this with the LAs involved, and then they could go and have discussions with their designated judge and talk about, well, look, this is what we're finding. what are you finding in your area? And I think it's that ability to be confident going into these multi-agency discussions or multi-organizational discussions that's really powerful when we think about combined use of data through authorities. And then we looked at repeat assessments. What was the type of repeat assessments? And the ones that most often came up were parenting assessments. Back to the slides, I think, Luke. It's all gone remarkably smoothly, like jumping between presentations and spreadsheets. I'm very impressed with the organization, Luke.
Thank you. This should be coming back up now.
Perfect. Yeah, so if we skip on to the next one. Yeah, so this was looking at the data lessons learned. This was more generally across the Trailblazers things. I think we've talked about some of these. Yeah, if we can skip on to the next one. So what we wanted to do next was have a discussion where we're working in, I think it's a couple of groups, where we just wanted to get your reflections for, I'm not sure how long we're going to be in groups for, but when we've looked at a data set like that, how confident would you be in interpreting and understanding that data? Is that similar to what you're working on in your own local authority? Is it different? So be really interested to have that discussion and get your feedback.
Okay. Thanks, John. So for this, we'll have two breakout rooms. So John will be in one, I'll be in the other. But the idea is that we'll be there probably for about a quarter of an hour. Would you say, John?
Yep, that sounds perfect.
Give us a chance to discuss this and talk about. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. That would give us a chance to talk about this in a little bit more detail, and then we can come back together as one group and share and discuss between the two groups and see if there's any similarity or any differences between the two groups and the discussions there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the groups, and there's normally a bit of an awkward moment while it takes time to do that, but if you bear with me, you should start moving through in the coming seconds.
I think we're all back, Luke.
Yeah, I think good. I hope no one was yanked out or sentence, but
it was all good. We were kind of waiting to be pulled back, and then did get, yeah. So it was good. The warning was helpful. Thank you.
No worries. Okay, is it helpful then to have a few minutes sort of feeding back around the different conversations in the two different groups so that we're kind of aware of what the others have been talking about? I'm not sure if there's someone who's willing to stick their hand up and be the first one to kind of to go there and sort of share what stood out for them or what were kind of the key points in the discussions in their room.
I don't mind just quickly jumping in, and they can tell me, my group can tell us if we're wrong. I think the reflection was that we all felt like this is an area of development and that nobody is kind of got it perfect at the moment. Within the group, there were definitely varying levels of data availability and that kind of thing. The SIN census pre-proceedings request that's come out has definitely kind of pushed the issue more to the forefront. So that's really positive. And there was so one of the other things we discussed as well was like, where does this data go within your organization? So it doesn't at the moment kind of form part of the regular children's social care, performance management thing in a lot of cases. Some may have it off to one side in a kind of separate meeting about pre-proceedings or proceedings, that kind of thing, but it's definitely not really established as such in the regular performance reporting within an LA. And also there's not a lot of contact with other LAs within your group. That could be quite variable as well, and that's where we got to.
Yeah, that's helpful. There's a very similar discussion in our group. I think or certainly to me, one of the key points that stood out was this point around it's all well, on the one hand, there's the first issue, which is trying to understand what data and what information you want and what is it that you're trying to get hold of. And then there's the second point of what do you need to do in order to get it, and how do you get there, and what. So we had a bit of a discussion around what the steps are that different local authorities are putting into place to make certain data entry points mandatory and compulsory, and there was a discussion around the kind of the challenges with that, depending on sort of what platform you're using, whether data is still primarily being held in Excel or whether it's being held on a kind of one of the many kind of data platforms that you can buy into, and how that, kind of how the data that you want to capture is built into people's processes and built into behaviors, which is, again, feels like something that hasn't been completely cracked, but is there. But there were kind of different ways of working that people were talking about, which was helpful.
Definitely.
Okay. Is there anything else does anyone in the room want to chip in with something that stood out for them? If there was anything helpful that they'd like to share? Kai, I think I see put something in the group, so I'll read it out, and then so if there were to be national data collection requirements that are mandatory as part of exercising safeguarding duties, then each local authority agency would have to resource the collection. Then there would then be uniformity. Yeah, there's that point of if something's mandated from above, then it has to happen.
Yeah, we did. We talked a little bit about this in that obviously here we're mostly local authority people, so I guess it was what can other agencies do, and how can we bridge that gap as well between different parts of the system to make sure that we've got a consistent view across the whole piece.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay. If there's no other points, so John, shall we run through the plan for next time? Or was is just helpfully put something in the group. So the issue is also who is responsible. So having a dedicated resource is always helpful. Leaving it to everyone isn't as helpful. Yeah. So that was in our group. So that was part of the discussion of who's responsible, of actually having a named team or a named person, rather than sort of leaving it in general to social workers to input the data. Makes it more likely that you're going to get it, which was really helpful. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so the next session is, I believe, 20th of March. I think I've put on the slides 20th of March, 1 till 2. And for that one,
sorry, I'm getting the slide back up.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just checking we've got the right date. I'd hate to give the wrong date out.
Give me. Sorry, it's just being slow. Good.
Sorry, it's 10th of March is the next session, and that's at 1 till 2. I've put 20th. I will amend that. I do apologise. So this is looking at, we've talked a little bit about the statutory pre-proceedings data set that's coming in from 26-27. So what we wanted to do there was kind of look at how the learning from this project can support. So some of those questions, like how do you get to being able to report on this pre-proceedings data set? What can you do with it? What kind of measures you might want to pull out of it? All that kind of thing. So that's the next session where it'll be really more focused on that and how it applies to families first as well.
Okay. Great, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for attending today. If you haven't had an invite to that next session on the 10th of March and you'd like to, please email me after this meeting. You should have my email address as part of the meeting invite for this today. So do get in touch and do follow up if there's anything, any questions or anything else that you'd like to raise after today's session. But thank you everyone again for attending. I hope you got something useful from it, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you.